about affordable housing in Providence and thinking about it with Bonnie Nickerson, who is the city planning director and the executive director of the Providence Redevelopment Agency.
You got it.
I wanted to call everything an authority today. I think I have some authoritarianism on the brain. Bonnie, I believe you have rights to share your screen, so you can take it away.
Let me see if I can get that going here. So I just wanted to give an overview of some of the housing work that we have going on right now. Thank you, Amy and Toonie, Venture Cafe, and thanks just for inviting me to be part of this conversation. I think it's a really exciting time, and there's so much really exciting stuff going on in housing. So it's just kind of really nice to kind of put it all together and have a conversation about it. So quick overview, what we do in our department as it relates to housing. So we do a lot of development financing of individual projects. And when I say development financing, I mean direct funding into projects and then also construction lending on individual housing projects. We invest in housing supports and housing related programs. We help to guide the city's housing policy and implement those policies. And then we actually write the zoning ordinance and write design regulations and other regulations that impact development and impact housing. And then we employ a series of redevelopment tools citywide, and we'll talk a little bit about that. So before we get into that, I thought it would be helpful to just kind of frame us around some of the challenges that we're seeing in Providence right now. So I think it will come as no surprise to everybody that we have really cost-burdened households in the city. So about 60% of our households are considered to be low or moderate income. And what that means is they have between 0 and 80% of area median family income as it's defined by HUD. And so 60% of our households are eligible for HUD programs as it relates to housing. And so of that group, 30% are considered extremely low income, which means that they have between 0 and 30% of area median household income. And so I think that's helpful for us to really think about what our priorities are, which is really increasing, obviously, the number of units that are available, and how do we do that? And we'll get into that in some detail. But also thinking about not just the income of our households, but the cost that housing is in Providence. So due to that mismatch, about 45% of households are considered cost burdened, which means they're paying more than 30% of their income on housing. And 30% is kind of that magic number that seems that everyone deems to be a kind of a reasonable number that you can continue to cover all of the other household costs that we have. And so of that group, about 25% of our households are severely cost burdened, which means they're paying over 50% of their annual income for housing related costs. And that's just not sustainable. And then another point is, while housing costs continue to rise, what we're seeing is that our household incomes are remaining relatively stagnant. So we have over the past several years seen about a 1% increase in household income. So what that means is that as time goes on, this cost burden is worsening. And so that creates a lot of unstable and unsustainable housing situations. And then two other quick points. It's no surprise to us that we have an older housing stock. So about 60% of the structures in our city were built before 1940. So that means that there's ongoing maintenance and remediation costs that are an additional level of burden to kind of low and moderate income households. And then again, many of our housing structures are multifamily structures. And so we have a challenge of really having enough accessible units. And so that's just kind of a frame for us to keep in mind. And then the other frame that I wanted to introduce is kind of the guiding goals that drive all the work that we're doing as it relates to housing. So I thought I would go through these very quickly. So overall, providing rental and home ownership housing for Providence residents at all incomes throughout all the city's neighborhoods. So right now, a lot of the deed restricted housing that we see is kind of concentrated in certain neighborhoods. And we really want to diversify those price points in all 25 neighborhoods across the city. We also want to encourage more price diversity in all of the new construction that we're seeing. So right now, about 12 to 15% of new construction is at that deed restricted level. So at that sort of 80% or lower AMI. And the rest of it is really geared toward the 120% or more AMI. So we want to increase that diversity of the new units that we're bringing online. And then I think what relates really well to what Christine was talking about is we want to implement some innovative and progressive regulations to allow for these creative housing solutions. So there's some really interesting, innovative ideas out there. We don't want our regulations to be a barrier to implementing those. So we will be putting in place some more innovative and progressive regulations to really allow for some of these interesting ideas that are bubbling up. We need to bring sort of all tools to the table to help make an impact here. We also want to be investing in our existing housing stock. So not just bringing new units online, but investing more in vacant and abandoned properties and actually just making those repairs to our existing stock so that they can be part of the solution here too. And then of course, bringing more funding sources. So we're never going to have just a big pile of money big enough to solve this, but can we be creative and innovative about leveraging new sources and partnering to increase the amount of funds we have available? So I thought I would talk really quickly about kind of what our priorities are this year. And they really focus around these three things. One is the COVID relief efforts that we have underway right now. A new comprehensive housing plan that we're getting ready to launch later this year, and a new funding tool for housing construction. Again, we'll be launching that later this year as well. So the COVID relief effort that we have started working on is funded through the Federal CARES Act and is really focused on these areas. A big focus is, which makes perfect sense, we're investing significantly in homeless prevention work. So that is in the form of both rental relief as well as eviction defense. We have funds that are specifically going to emergency rental, mortgage, and utility payments for folks that have been impacted by the pandemic and have lost their job or lost income. Funds that are specific to households that are being impacted by domestic violence. And then, as you can see here, about 1.6 million is being invested into our existing shelter system. So expanding beds, supplying the supplies, and additional cleaning and things that are needed, and then expanding the street outreach. So over the past year, we've been working on what we're calling an anti-displacement and comprehensive housing strategy. So it's kind of a long title, but what it is really the city's first affordable housing plan. So we have lots of different plans that impact housing. We have our HUD federal requirement to develop a plan for our federal investments, and that's called our consolidated plan. We have a comprehensive plan and many other neighborhood plans, but this is the first time that the city has created a plan that's specific to housing production, housing policies and programs and funding. And so we're really excited to be launching this. And so I'm going to go through a few of the examples of what we touch on in the plan. I'm not going to focus too much on it, but happy to talk more about it. But the kind of big picture, it really does lay out a 10-year blueprint for us for housing production. So it establishes goals based on what we're seeing in the demographic data today and demographic projections going out over that 10-year period. So what types of units do we need to be focused on, and looking at different geographic areas of the city. So really looking at production goals. It also lays out a series of new policies and new programs that we're going to be pursuing, and kind of tweaks to some of our existing policies and existing programs. So we will be tracking our progress against this plan. We are right now hiring a staff person to lead the implementation of this work. The call is open until tomorrow, so if you know of anyone, please send them our way. We're looking for somebody to join our community development division and really focus a lot of their efforts on this housing work. So here are some of the policy changes. I'm not going to get into these in too much detail, but I thought I would call out a couple of the zoning recommendations. So overall, what we want to do is really free up this idea of having creative and innovative solutions to this housing crisis. So activating small lots for infill development. So right now we have regulations that say you have to have a certain amount of land per dwelling for each dwelling. And so if we can reduce down that amount of land, it frees up some of these smaller lots for infill development. We also want to make it easy to do accessory dwellings. So for example, converting a garage to a studio apartment or something like that, we want to make that a little bit easier to do. And also allow for things like row homes and cluster development, which you just saw a really excellent example of that. Right now, you're not allowed to do that in our current regulation. So we want to free up some of these interesting ideas to be able to come to life. So program changes, we're looking at our home repair and down payment programs and seeing if we can expand eligibility to those and have some ideas about how to do that. We're talking about new programs and strategies. So one good example here is on code compliance. So the program that we're going to be rolling out will require that all rental units actually register with the city each year and have to pass a what's called a certificate of habitability. So they have to pass a certain threshold of code compliance. And we think that's really important because right now the onus on code compliance almost falls to the renter. They often are the ones that are bringing complaints up for health and safety concerns, et cetera. So we want to shift that balance over to the landlord. So by requiring this every year and requiring the registration and the certificate, it's going to just bring up to code a lot of that older housing stock that we had talked about earlier. And then, of course, we want to think about how we can bring new revenues into the equation. And then part of that is being a little bit more creative about partnerships and leveraging partnerships. So for example, a lot of the institutions in the city, like universities and hospitals, is there a way that we can be partnering together to work on this housing solution in collaboration with other nonprofits? And so if we all can sort of think about this strategically, and maybe we can organize around this 10-year housing strategy, can we make a bigger impact collectively than we would be doing individually? And then in the plan itself, it will have what we're calling a decision matrix, which is basically to say, you know, there's a lot more projects that apply for funds than funds that we have available. So how are we going to prioritize what we want to invest in? And it's basically going to be based on the goals that we talked about earlier. So we'll be using this decision matrix to fund projects as they come before us. This is really exciting to be able to talk about today. Later this year, we're going to be launching a new city housing bond. This is one of the recommendations that comes out of the plan. And we about this time last year passed the first dedicated stream of city general funds that will be used for housing construction. And so the way that works is that the city will be segregating 10% of the tax revenue that comes in from projects that have a tax stabilization agreement. And that 10% of tax revenue goes into the Providence Housing Trust. And so for the past several months, we've been working with bond finance folks and bond attorneys about how to leverage that 10% of tax revenue into a new housing bond. And so we're going to be launching that at the end of this year. We're going to be announcing a call for projects. So we'll be doing construction lending and permanent financing for new projects. So Christine, keep that in mind. for some of these ideas that are
Oh, you
floating
betcha.
out. So we're really excited. And again, it's just exciting to see the first time that we've really figured out how to dedicate general fund revenue to housing production. And I couldn't resist talking about a couple of other fun things that are happening right now. So in addition to the CARES Act funding that we get from the federal government, each year we get a formula allocation of HUD funds. So I just wanted to give you a quick snapshot of what we're investing in this year with those formula funds. And those are through the HOME program and the CDBG program. So we have a very successful up and running program for owner occupied home repairs. These are for income qualified homeowners. And so each year we invest about $300,000 in that program, which is really geared to help owners remain in their homes. So critical repairs like a new heating system, new roof. Many of these homes are owned by seniors, and we really want to help them stay in their homes. And that's what that's about. We also each year invest in abandoned and vacant properties. So we have been working since the mayor took office several years ago. We have been prioritizing vacant and abandoned properties that are throughout our neighborhoods. We identified 600 units back in 2015. We have successfully rehabbed 600 units to date. But as we know, this is not a static problem. This is, cyclical. And so as new units are coming online as rehabbed and ready to be in the rental market, other properties are becoming vacant and abandoned. So this is a constant churn, but we're continuing to address this issue. And we also invest every year in a down payment assistance program for income qualified buyers. And then each year we do invest home and CDBG funds into new construction. And so this year our focus is on small multifamily projects and single family construction. So we have about 1.26 million going into two projects. One is a scattered site swap investment, and the second is AIDS Care and Amos House, a joint venture with those groups. And then 2.7 million will be going into preserving existing affordable units, so 30 units in a single project, and then a new construction of a multi-unit 8-unit project. And I think by looking at these numbers, everyone knows that it's not one funding source that makes these projects work, but each of these projects is kind of, a pie that has 8 or 9 or even more slices. And so in many cases, these funds are sort of critical gap financing, like sort of filling in those pieces where it sort of makes a project work. And then on the redevelopment side, this is on the Providence Redevelopment Agency side. I did want to talk about a few really interesting projects. One is Paragon Mills. So there's been this mill complex right in Olneyville Square that's been vacant and abandoned for some time, over a decade now. The PRA acquired this mill complex about 18 months ago, and we did an RFP to seek a development partner. And we successfully have been working towards a 100-unit mixed income housing development. 50% of those units will be deed restricted affordable. And the project was awarded low-income housing tax credits from Rhode Island Housing in the last round. And so construction will be underway this spring. So we're thrilled about that. It's just really, really exciting to see that whole complex come back to life right in the heart of Olneyville Square. And then the other project that I'm just thrilled about is, and I saw somebody had posted a question about Barbara Jordan. So I think a lot of people are really excited about this one. So 80 units in a scattered site development will be developed in the Upper South Providence neighborhood. Again, these units have been vacant and abandoned for quite some time. So it's just going to be such a transformational project for this part of the city. And the PRA is going to be assisting in some financing on that project. And then lastly, I wanted to mention that the PRA is looking for a development partner for a former elementary school building at 22 Rye Street, which is in the Silver Lake neighborhood. So hoping to convert that school building into affordable housing, and looking for a development partner. If anyone's interested or you know of anybody, send them our way. And so I think that was it. Yeah. So here I just wanted to just let you know that our team is very accessible and always happy to engage in these conversations. So please reach out and be in touch with us. A great first point of contact is our principal planner, Jess Flommer. She's been leading the housing study work, and she can kind of direct folks to the rest of our team to address any questions that you might have, or any needs for more information. So happy to go into questions. Amy, I will turn it back to you.
I think Amy has a noisy house with little people, so.
Oh, okay. Right back to you, Toonie.
So first of all, thank you, Christine, Bonnie, Laura. Thank you all for all you're doing. There are some questions here. So Yulia said, what is the likelihood of being able to spread density in affordable housing projects throughout all wards in the city? It sounds like you're already doing that, but do you want to?
Yeah, that's a good one. I'll start, and then Christine, you jump in because you have a critical piece of this as well. So, so our neighborhoods are already allow for quite a bit of density, and the plan that we have put forth is going to loosen that up even more. And so that it's really by zoning designation. Instead of it, we don't think of it as neighborhood by neighborhood, but we think of it in relation to the R1, R2, R3, R4 zones, and then the commercial zones, which again apply kind of universally citywide. So that's how we will approach it. But we have successfully, over the years, allowed for more density in a thoughtful way, and I think in a respectful way of the existing character of our neighborhood. So back in 2014, we redid our zoning ordinance and made a lot of changes at that point to reduce parking requirements, and we were really progressive about pushing that concept forward. And so we're basically going to just continue to do that, and I'm very confident that we'll be able to. I think the community recognizes this as a critical need. And so we'll be working with very, very closely with the City Plan Commission to implement these changes. And Christine, as chair, may want to jump in on this topic.
Yeah, right. Yeah. So that was what I was kind of vaguely alluding to, and I'm really excited, about all the work that Bonnie and the staff at planning has been doing and teeing this up to be, really, I'm really excited about what's coming down the pike. In response to the question about all neighborhoods, I think that yes, there's absolutely a preponderance of social services in certain neighborhoods in the city. There are affordable housing projects, though, throughout that might be quieter, that people may not be aware of. I think we need to be very thoughtful about how and where we're encouraging affordable housing projects. Everything that I've seen suggests that integration and a mixed income approach is beneficial to everybody. It helps people on the wealthier end of the spectrum be out of their bubble, and it helps people on the lower end have role models for their kids and generally not feel like they've been segregated from society. So having said that, yeah, I think everything's on the table. I know one of my other roles with the city is on the Providence Building Board of Review. And I talked to some members of City Council about this a little while back. And I talked about how many cases we see in terms of code review of going from 2 families to 3 families, or just legalizing 3 families. And I think there was a misconception that this was confined to some of the lower income neighborhoods. It's like, no, it's everywhere. It's, College Hill and Fox Point and the hospital zone, Summit, as well as South Providence, North Providence, everywhere, and I think this is one of the things that the zoning reforms of 2014 helped enable, is to allow things like triple deckers to exist, where the zoning that came into place mid-century actually made illegal a lot of the housing stock that we had in Providence. So just smoothing the process for those that housing stock to actually be safer and online is an important piece of getting all neighborhoods to participate.
So Marie, of course, my girlfriend Marie asked the same question I was thinking about. Bonnie, Marie says, am I correct in assuming that there is more flexibility and potential grant funding available in the opportunity zones? Can you speak a little bit to opportunity zones and what's going on?
Yeah, that I would love to hear more from both of you to hear your thoughts about how you think it integrates. But as you guys know, the opportunity zone designation is a federal designation, and it is specific to kind of investments in those areas. And so we haven't really seen a braiding of the opportunity zone kind of investment with affordable housing. Although I can say, for example, with Paragon Mills, Olneyville Square is in the opportunity zone, and that developer, who is a large scale developer that works around the country, I think that made it just that much more attractive to take on that project. So one of the challenges with opportunity zones, as you guys know, is that federal designation happens with the investor on the back end. So we wouldn't necessarily know how much of a consideration the opportunity zone was for any particular development to actually come to fruition. But in Olneyville, I think a few projects that has been one of the factors that brought that investor to the table.
Awesome. David, who I had the pleasure of meeting yesterday, and a half an hour Zoom call turned into an hour and a half, is very passionate and invested in all of what we're talking about and so much more. So he touched on this in our conversation yesterday. So said there is a law currently on the books that allows individuals to sue for receivership of a property that is in disrepair. There are some entities that are working with homeowners to bring suits to individuals with such houses. Often they are low-income individuals who are house burdened. They have little resources to fight this suit and often lose their homes. I'm currently helping one owner keep his property. I think it is important to be aware that this is happening because it is one thing to support transition of properties, but it is also important to understand who owns these properties and why they are in disrepair. So I know in your slides, you talked a little bit about money that you have available for these situations. Do you want to just?
Yeah, receivership is challenging. So the projects that I talked about, we don't work on any project that isn't already certified vacant and abandoned. So we do not displace anyone. We don't work on any of those projects.
To interrupt though, it sounds like you have funding to help prevent this, right?
Right. So we have the home repair funds to work with homeowners, but on the vacant and abandoned property work is for, structures that are certified as abandoned and vacant. But I think the point around receivership is a valid point. So the state law guides the receivership process, and it is kind of complicated. And I would agree that in some cases produces an outcome that is not what it's intended for. So you can petition a property into receivership if you're within a certain distance of the property. And so attorneys and nonprofits and others can serve as the receiver. And so then there's a whole court process where the court designates a receiver, which basically designates that individual as sort of the guardian of what happens with that property. And so it can be very complicated, and in some cases, really, really challenging for property owners. What I can say is that we have a very close relationship with the courts. And so through our law department, whenever we are notified of a situation like that, we have tools that we can bring to bear, either loans or code enforcement, sort of working out a plan. Like, we are very, very much aware of that issue. And I think, unfortunately, it's going to become a bigger issue. We're I think going to see what the economic fallout has been over the past year, and it's going to continue to be an issue. So, but you're absolutely right to bring it up and to note that it is a challenge. Absolutely.
So Amy said, what is the impact on the schools? Do you anticipate that this would help the school system to restructure and improve the status of all Providence schools? Do you want to expound on that? Are you still noisy?
Yeah, no, I was just thinking about how, we hear so much about Providence schools now, and we know that some of them are failing, but some of them are doing just fine. But if we can kind of diversify the the neighborhoods that these kids come from. Have you guys been talking to the school department at all, or is that like too far, too many?
Yeah, I mean, no, it is a good point. And I think, part of what we were talking about before about having price diversity in every neighborhood is kind of getting at that. Like we have neighborhoods that we consider kind of high opportunity neighborhoods. And what does that look like? It looks like a neighborhood that has a really good quality school, that has a lot of transportation access and, all of the other sort of quality of life indicators. So it does make a difference, making sure that we have affordable rental and home ownership opportunities in each neighborhood. It does make a difference for student outcomes. I can say that we aren't having that discussion sort of closely integrated with the school department just because they're going through kind of a whole process around, as you know, around school buildings and which buildings are going to be invested in, which ones may be surplus and repurposed. So there's just so much happening right now. But in general, it really does impact kind of quality of life for families, and that impacts student outcomes for sure.
I loved what Laura said, be a human to humans. And I happen to know you both, Christine and Bonnie. And, I so appreciate how you are so patient and how much you've gotten done over the past decade. I was with Bonnie back in December or November, and I felt like I lifted my head up and saw what you've all been up to in the past decade. And I went, oh my gosh, we're all doers. So we tend to have our head down doing. And it was just such an aha moment to look up, and Bonnie and I were in Olneyville, and I said, oh my gosh, look at all you guys have done. And so I, as much as we have so much more work to do, it is important to take a step back and say, but look how far, look how far the needle has moved. So I just wanted to take a moment to thank you all, you two in particular, because you're on my screen right now. And I know how hard you work and how thoughtfully you both approach all of this. So.